Hi, my name's Dave and welcome back. I'm sure, just like me, you've been absolutely glued to your TVs and watching some of those amazing athletes perform at the Paris Olympic Games. If we're going to talk about an Olympics, you can't go past some of those highlight reel moments where an athlete under extreme pressure has stepped out and shown their supremeness. Think about Simone Biles on the final exercise, final all-round. She was the last athlete, the last piece. She had to perform one of her best routines ever in order to secure the Olympic gold, and she did. And when you look at that, you think, wow, that's just an amazing individual athlete. However, there's more to it than just her being the GOAT. There's a lot more to why Simone Biles or any of the other amazing athletes have been able to step up and perform. So we talk about the 5 rings of performance. And these are the 5 phases we go through as an athlete in order to be able to perform under pressure. The first one is what we call pure execution. Now think about being inside a vacuum, inside a bubble where there's absolutely no influence on you, other than you learning a skill or learning a sequence or learning a performance. If you think about being inside that vacuum, inside that bubble, this is the purest form of execution. There's no one watching you, there's no one judging you, there's no consequence to what you're doing. It's purely and simply, can you do that skill? This is where we learn to be internally referenced. So the implicit learning process of, I know how to do this, I can do this. This is something that I've nailed this, I own this. And that is really, really important when we talk about performing on the big stage. And it all starts in day one, when you first start doing those skills, when there's nobody watching. I often talk about capacity versus propensity. And your capacity to do something is your how. How do you do this? How effective at it are you? And if you're incredibly effective at it, that's your capacity. Your propensity, on the other hand, is the things you do when nobody's watching. Are you likely to go out and push and own that skill when there's nobody watching? Or are you looking for your coach or the situation to dictate your performance? I hear athletes say to me all the time, it's competition day, Dave. I'm going to step it up. There's a new level in what I do. And that always concerns me. And it concerns me because I think the athletes are waiting for an external force to push their performance up. That's a challenging place to come from when you're looking to trust execution. So propensity to look at that pure execution, that first phase of the ring is, okay, when there's nobody watching, can I do this? When there's nobody pushing me, nudging me, putting me under pressure, putting me on the spot, can I step up and execute that skill? If I can, then I can trust that skill. And I can trust it in any situation. The second phase, or the second ring, is collaborative execution. Now, this is the collaboration between you as an athlete or you as a coach. If you and your athlete or you and your coach are working together, then there's an external observation about what you're doing. There's an external input into that process of learning and trusting that skill. If we go through this process of pure internal implicit learning first of all, before we get to the external learning process or explicit learning, where the coach's influence has an impact on whether you can trust your skill or not, then we're building on that level of trust. If we start here with, if the coach thinks I can do it, then the coach has to tell you at competition that you can go and you can execute. That puts us in a confidence place, but not a self-belief place. Confidence is external. It's externally influenced. It's driven by our results. It's driven by the people around us. It's driven by the conversations we have with the people that we trust. So coaches or our teammates, or you've got to go out and execute that skill before you believe you can do that because your coach has told you to. So when we're talking about this collaborative phase, this should be a confirmation to your internal self-belief. So if you've gone through that process of pure execution and you know what, I know I can do this, inside that bubble, inside that vacuum, I own this skill. The coach coming along should either challenge that and go, it's not yet where it needs to be, or confirm that and go, yeah, you're right, you do own this, you've got this, you should trust this. And that language of you should trust this rather than I trust this or I trust you is a very different place. We want to build layers to our self-belief and our confidence in execution. So those first two performance layers are critical when we're looking at execution under pressure. And that is, I've got to trust myself to execute, and I've got to trust the people around me have given the right cues to say, yeah, we've got this, that collaborative layer of what we're doing. From a coach's perspective, I work with a lot of high performance coaches, and one of the first things I'll get that coach to do is to record their voice and when they're coaching that athlete. And what we're looking for is, are you empowering the athlete or are you convincing the athlete? If you're empowering the athlete, you're confirming what they think and the way that they communicate. If you're trying to convince them, then you're trying to sell to them, to convince them that they're on track, it's going to work for them. So those first two rings of performance are the critical foundations to high performance under extreme pressure. The third phase is assessed execution. So this is the first exposure most athletes get to a competitive environment. So that might be performing in front of your peers that you're training with. It might be your first exposure to a competition, so a low-level competition. And what most situations dictate is we spend all our time in preparation, and then we hurl these athletes into a competition environment and go, well, it's important to you, so you should be able to perform. But we don't necessarily train an athlete in how to perform. So this first assessed execution process, these first competitions, are really, really important because they're the foundations of how we see that competitive landscape, that competitive environment. If we go into our first competitions and we're super nervous and we don't really know how to execute, we haven't come from a place where we really trust that implicit, that internal voice that's going, yeah, I own this. This is just going out and executing what I already know. Then we can form an unhealthy relationship with competition. Sometimes that unhealthy relationship with competition looks like, I don't like to compete, I hate to compete, I'm always so nervous, I throw up before I compete. All of these are common things I hear from athletes. Or if we go back to that phase two, which is that collaborative environment, if it's dictated by the coach's opinions, we can end up with this codependency where I can't compete unless my coach tells me I'm good enough to compete, or I can't compete unless my coach is there. And that's pushing the control mechanism out to the coach rather than owning that performance. So this first phase of exposure to the competitive environment is critical, that we teach athletes how to compete, how to own that process. Now, anybody that's listened to me either lecture or you've been through my funnel process, my preparation for competition and performance, know that we teach athletes that when you go to compete, you should already know, yeah, I know how to do this. This is just executing what I already know. And that's teaching an athlete to have a much healthier relationship with the competitive environment. If you're an athlete and you are looking to get to the top of your sport, you're going to be exposed to being assessed. Now, that assessment could be the competition, it could be qualification, it could be a verification. Anything that you're going and somebody else is assessing you and your capacity to perform, that's your exposure to being assessed under pressure. Learning that phase is critical for a healthy relationship with competition. The fourth phase is consequence execution. Now, this is when we get to a competitive environment that has a higher than normal consequence to how well you perform. So this could be qualification to go to an Olympics or a qualification to be selected on a team. So you know it's important. So how do we deal with that next level of consequence? If I perform well, I get something out of this. If I don't perform well, then I've just blown my opportunity to be selected, to reach my final goal, my final objective. It goes back to, again, if you notice what we're doing, everything that we do here is building on the previous level. So when we looked at that first assessed environment where you're going out and it's your first exposure to competition, having a really healthy relationship with how you prepared, making sure that your preparation process has got some rungs on the ladder. Yeah, I went out to a little club competition, I went through my process, I hit my routines. Yeah, this works. Now the only thing that's changed is an increase in consequence. And if there's an increase in consequence, there should be an increased focus on processing how you get there. And if you've got a really robust system, a really good funnel system with what we teach here at the Smart Mind, then it doesn't matter the degree of consequence. What matters is your trust in your preparation process. And so that execution, it comes from a place of trust rather than fear. So this leads us to that final fifth phase, that fifth ring of execution. And this is Pinnacle execution. That Simone Biles floor routine at the Paris Olympics. I watched her perform, and I watched her before she stepped up onto that floor. She would have known that there was millions of people watching her. She would have known that the amount of Hollywood stars that were in the audience, every TV camera around the world was focused on her. Anybody would have been nervous in that situation. And she was nervous, you could see that. Yep, you could also see she was focusing internally. She was focusing on what she was about to execute and how she executes. She wasn't thinking to herself, this is massive, this is Olympics, this is my opportunity, my redemption to come back and win an Olympic gold again. She was thinking, how do I do this floor routine? What's my first tipping point execution here? And that goes all the way back down to the fundamental part of this, that pure execution inside that vacuum. I teach all of my athletes in all the sports that I work with, when you step out onto that big stage and there's huge amounts of consequence, that pinnacle performance, you need to be inside your bubble and trust and execute what you already know. And when we look at the 5 rings of performance, that's a fundamental message in all of this. Learning how to trust, how to execute. Recognition and reward in your training process. Recognition and reward inside that vacuum where you go, no one's watching. Nobody's asked me to do this routine. I've executed it. Yeah, I own that. I can do this. I can do this no matter what. So that when the pressure's on and the emotions have risen to the point of overboiling and everybody around you, the world is on tender hooks, waiting for you as an athlete to execute, for you, nothing changes. For you, it goes back to that pure first step. I know how to do this, and all I'm going to do is what I know. So the 5 rings of performance are critical from an athlete's perspective. If you're an athlete, you need to be able to understand each one of these. And the reason I use rings is because we have to close those loops. There's no point in skimming through those 5 phases to get to an Olympic Games, because when you get put under pressure, you want it to be a solid, reliable and replicable execution. And the way we do that is we close that loop. We make sure that when we've executed at phase 1, that first pure performance, we've ticked all the right boxes. We own that, we've closed that loop. Before we move on to the second loop, the collaboration with the coach, what is it we as collectively need to know? What boxes do we need to tick to make sure that, yep, we've got this, we've nailed this down. I know what I'm doing as an athlete. My coach confirms that, yeah, we've got this. Then when you take it out into your first exposure to the competition world, when you're being assessed, I want to make sure I want to set an objective for this competition. Now, any athlete that works with me, no, I don't actually talk about winning. I don't say the objective of this competition is to win. Although absolutely I want to win, absolutely want to nail that and be standing on top of that dais. But we set competition objectives, or we set assessment objectives or trial objectives. What is it I want to hit and how do I want to hit it? So that we're closing that loop. For me to execute, this, and this needs to happen. Yep, tick, 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 got it. I can now perform under expectation and pressure. Then when we go to that next level where there's consequences, this is our opportunity to pressure test and go, right, I'm still going to set my competition objectives. I'm still going to nail those. Yes, the consequences are higher. However, when I hit all of those things, I achieve my outcome. I get what I came here for. And then finally, when we get to the pinnacle of all performance, when the whole world is watching you, you're standing in that arena and you know that every single set of eyeballs are on you, you've got a very, very solid framework to perform. So, as an athlete, I'd love you to be able to self-assess and look at those 5 phases, those 5 rings, and ask yourself, have I nailed each one of those different rings and have I closed those loops? Do I know what I need to know to ensure that under pressure, I can perform? As a coach, and particularly if you've got athletes that sometimes under pressure don't perform, I want you to ask yourself, have you helped them and guided them through each one of those phases, closing each one of those performance loops? And if they haven't, which ones haven't they closed? Because that'll give you a good indication as to what specifically is derailing them under pressure. Hope you've got a lot from that and learned a little bit about why some athletes absolutely nail it under high performance pressure situations and why some struggle. I look forward to sharing some more information with you next time. Until then, train smart and enjoy the ride. My name's Diggle. We'll see you then.